Today's reading is from Christina Feldman in her book Compassion, Listening to the Cries of the World. She says, "It doesn't matter what our spiritual, political, or social background is. We all long for tenderness, understanding, and safety. What gives meaning to our lives is to give and receive the care, sensitivity, and love that nourish our spirits. When we are young and when we are old, we depend on the compassion and care of others. When we are ill, hurting, or afraid, it is compassion that restores and shelters us. When all of our certainties, defenses, and supports are stripped away, it is compassion that heals us. Compassion is the highest of all gifts that you can offer to or receive from another." And so it is.
So welcome to those of you who may have just walked into the sanctuary. The theme for the month of May is compassion. I care for the poor. And last week we took an in-depth look at compassion, what it is and what it is not. And I talked at length about three different terms that are often used interchangeably, but actually have very different meanings. And those three terms are sympathy, empathy, and compassion. Now, sympathy is an awareness and an acknowledgement of distress in other people. It is saying, I see you and I am sorry for your plight. Empathy is the ability to experience for ourselves some of the pain that others might be feeling. It is the ability to stand in or to walk in another person's shoes. It is saying, I feel what you feel. Now, we don't have to have experienced exactly the same events that somebody else has experienced, but we at least have to have the ability to imagine, based perhaps on some other experiences in our lives, what that person is feeling in the moment. Now, compassion is a word that is used in the same way, with the same meaning as empathy. As with empathy, we understand what the other person is feeling and that we're able to place ourselves in their shoes. But different from empathy, when we feel compassion, we have a desire to do something about it. We have a desire to take some action to alleviate their pain. Now, my guess is that most of us here today are familiar with the story in the Bible of the Good Samaritan. Now, I think that the Good Samaritan is a pretty good example of the difference between these three terms and how we live our lives from these three terms. Now, the parable of the Good Samaritan tells about a man that is traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. And on his way, he is robbed of everything that he has, even his clothing, and is beaten to almost an inch of his life. The rest of the story tells about three people who come upon this man. Now, the first is a priest. And the priest sees this beaten and broken man, and he walks over on to the other side of the road. Sympathy, it's a good start, but it often walks to the other side of the road and says, I feel bad for you, but I'm really glad that that's not me. I'm really glad that I'm not having that experience. Now, the next person to walk by is a Levite. And he too sees the man laying there along the side of the road, beaten and broken, and he too walks over onto the other side of the road. Now, while we were not there, right, we were not there at the time. We had Ruth will attest to this, we have a world religion class instructor who always, when she's asked a question that she might not know the answer, she goes, I don't know, was you there? So we weren't there, but so I'd like you to just take a moment to imagine that Levite said something like, this is unspeakable. It is horrible. I too have been beaten and shamed before. I know what it feels like. I wish I could help, but I can't. So empathy shares deeply in the feelings of the other person, and most often from a very personal experience that they too have had. But even at its best, empathy is a feeling and will still leave the man laying in the ditch. The third man, put a little punctuation on that one. Now, the third man walking by is a Samaritan, and as we know, he assists the man. He put his feelings into action. So if sympathy sees the need and empathy feels the need, then it is compassion that touches the need, that does or says something to alleviate the pain. Makes perfect sense now, yes? Now, in today's inspirational quote, you heard Christina Feldman said, "Compassion is the greatest of all gifts that you can offer to or receive from another." Now, I believe that this is the truth. I believe that compassion is a God quality and that we arrived on the planet with that ability to be compassionate already imbued within us. I believe that we all innately have this desire to receive or to give compassion with everything and everyone. It just simply lives in us. So if compassion is a God quality, a quality that we arrived on the planet with, a quality that is the innate natural condition of our hearts, why is it that individually and collectively we often have so much trouble or so much of a challenge really living from that space, really living from the compassion that is within us? Now, one reason might be that while we have the ability to be compassionate within us, we also have the capacity for fear and judgment and criticism and anger and worry and doubt and isolation and separation. So each of those things can be barriers to compassion. They can be barriers to our ability to really reach out from that deep space of love that is within us. On a personal, individual level, every human journey has stories of tragedy and loss, stories of disappointment and fear. We all experience moments of frailty and pain. We all have stories of emotional or psychological turmoil. Colleagues may frustrate us. Lovers may betray us. Children may leave us. Friends can irritate us. Well, a little bit maybe. And companies will release us. It is just a part of life. It happens. Life cannot not always be controlled or predicted. And we all experience those things. And in those moments of fear or doubt or worry or anger or resentment, then this need for self-protection arises within us. And in those moments, we face a choice to lock down our hearts or to close off our minds or to allow our bodies to contract or to increase that sense of separation by building even bigger walls between us, or we can dive inward to find and to nurture that space of love, that space of compassion, that space of patience and acceptance and balance and resilience and courage in order to be able to deepen our ability to be compassionate for ourselves and to be compassionate for each other. We have that choice. Every day, every single day, we see on the news or we read online about the harshness of the world, about the things that people can and very often do to each other, about the cruelty that is imposed on young children or animals, to name just a few of the events that happen on a day-to-day basis that can bring up such emotion in us. We may find it almost incomprehensible to believe that we could or should be able to compassionately care about everyone in these situations. Christine Feldman says, you may doubt the appropriateness of compassion when you are faced with inexplicable acts of cruelty. At times, it feels impossible to find forgiveness and understanding when you are faced with the pain of loss, betrayal, or injustice. It is true that finding compassion is not often easy, yet the alternative is much harder. Living with anger, resentment, and alienation in your heart is much more difficult. Now, ordinary people such as Jesus or Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela found a way to be able to express compassion at the same time that they stood their ground for kindness and for equality and for basic human rights. Christine Feldman goes on to say, compassion speaks of the willingness to engage with tragedy, loss, and pain. Its domain is not only the world of those that you love and care for, but equally the people who threaten you, the countless people you don't know, the homeless person you met on the street, and the situations of anger and hatred that you recoil from. It is here that you learn about the depths of tolerance and understanding that are possible for each one of us. It is here that you learn about dignity, meaning, and greatness of heart. Not easy. No one is saying that it is easy, but it is a magnificent way to live our lives. It is an expansion of our heart and a sharing of the love that we came here to share. Today, we're taking the time to really take a look at how to cultivate and powerfully step into compassion. Who do we need to be, and what do we need to do in order to be who we really truly came here to be who we really truly are, divine expressions of God having a human experience? How do we bring that out into the world? Now, the beloved Tibetan Buddhist nun, Pema Chodron, says that there are 3 ways of making the commitment to being a compassionate presence on the planet. The first is called entering like a monarch. This means like a monarch, means not like the butterfly, but like a monarch, like a king or queen. So this means, as a king or queen, getting our own kingdom into order, and then, on the basis of that strength, taking care of our subjects. So, as an analogy, we work on ourselves first and foremost. We get our own lives together, and then we can be a beneficial presence on the planet. To the degree that we are not triggered anymore by that news, not triggered anymore by what we read online, to the degree that we are not triggered anymore, we can stay present and not close our minds and our hearts. Pretty hard when we get triggered. Now, the next way to make the commitment to being a compassionate presence on the planet is with the attitude of a ferryman. Now, here the analogy is that our pain will become the stepping stone for understanding the pain of others. That rather than allowing our own suffering to make us more self-absorbed, it means it means it is the means by which we begin to really understand what other people are going through, really begin to understand their pain. And the third way to make the commitment to being a compassionate presence on the planet is that of the shepherd and the shepherdess. Now, the shepherd and the shepherdess always take care of their flock first. So this is the story that I told you about the grandfather with the frogs last week. This is the fireman that runs into a burning building. This is a mother who is willing to risk her life in order to save her children. The shepherd and the shepherdess automatically always put their flock first. Now, all three ways are really important in our lives. If we really were to think about it, we could probably think of examples of each of them in our own lives. For example, if you're here today, then probably you are already doing the inner work, or at least you're willing to do the inner work with the intention to be present and to be compassionate with each other. There are times when our sorrow has connected us with the sorrow of other people, when our grief or our physical pain has been a catalyst for really appreciating what other people are going through. And I'm sure that you can think of times when you spontaneously put other people first. Now, my talk title today is Cause and Effect. When I first began to sit with this talk title, I wasn't really sure exactly how I would speak about it in a month whose theme is compassion. But as usually happens, as I sat with it, I really received everything that I needed to know, and it came in the form of a book called Living with an Open Heart. And in this book, Living with an Open Heart, the authors Russell Colts and Tubton children talks about what they call the 7-point instruction of cause and effect, the 7-point instruction of cause and effect. And they say that it is a method to really be able to cultivate compassion within yourself, and for others. So step 1 involves contemplating that we are all really connected to one another, that we are connected to everything and everyone on that planet through that golden thread of God's stuff that weaves itself throughout all of life. So in step 1, we just take the time to really contemplate this truth. In step 2, we reflect upon the kindness that we have received throughout our life, and most especially when we were young. Perhaps it was our parents or our grandparents or our teachers or a host of other people who really supported us or guided us or taught us or loved us unconditionally. Reflecting on the kindness that we have received throughout our lives allows us to feel gratitude. And we all know how lovely it is to feel gratitude. In step 3, contemplating the kindness that we received when we were growing up arouses within us the desire to repay that kindness, to pay it forward. Now, our hearts in this step really begin to open up in ways that they have never opened up before. Step 4 and step 5 are really love and compassion themselves. And within this this idea of the seven-step instructions, love and compassion have very specific meanings. So the authors defined love as the desire for someone to have happiness and all of its causes. And they defined compassion as the desire for others to be free from suffering and its causes. Now, from the Buddhist standpoint, everything and everyone is worthy of compassion and love because our fundamental nature is good. Our fundamental nature is pure. Our fundamental nature is innocent. And this fundamental nature can never be taken away from us, even though we all have that capacity to be overwhelmed by really disturbing thoughts and feelings. And we all have the capacity to act in ways that are sometimes harmful to other people because of those disturbing thoughts and emotions that we might have. But the truth is that our negative emotions and our mistaken acts are not who we are. It is not who we are at our core. We all are inherently worthy of love and compassion, no matter what. Now, the sixth step is to develop not only this wish for people to be happy or this wish for people to be free of suffering, but to do something about it, to begin to take some kind of action. And it doesn't have to be big and grandiose kinds of actions. It could be something small. It could be just wishing them well or saying a prayer. Now, they say that the first 6 steps produce the 7th step, and the 7th step is altruistic intention. Now, this is the consciousness that is committed to letting loose all of our negativities and all of our judgments, and instead cultivating all of the good qualities that we have within us in order to be able to give the greatest benefit to the planet, in order to be able to give the greatest benefit to everything and everyone. In order for us to powerfully step into compassion, the first invitation is to stand firmly grounded in our oneness with all of life. To remember that we are all one and that we are way more alike than we are different. Our personal experiences of pain and joy and agony and ecstasy may be unique to each one of us in the forms that they take, but the capacity to feel grief or pain or disappointment or loneliness or anger or rage, as well as the capacity to feel delight and love and compassion and understanding and joy and ease, they are our common bonds. They are our common bonds as living beings. They are the things that we have that are more alike than we are different. All of them, the ones that we would call positive and the ones that we would call negative. Now, the second invitation is to stay open. Be willing to turn away from judgment, prejudice, fear, and intolerance. Be willing to listen to what other people are saying and what they are not saying. Be willing to learn of their stories and be willing to walk in their shoes. Being compassionate does not mean that we condone any and all actions, but it simply means that we no longer give others the power over our lives or give them the power to mess with the peace of our lives or the joy or the love. It simply means that powerfully stepping into expressing the love that we are at the core of our being out into the world, to allowing that flow to just happen. Practicing compassion softens our hearts and it makes us feel better. Instead of being angry at the guy that cuts you off on your way to work tomorrow morning, or the young woman that pushes past you and jostles you in the elevator, take a moment to really just think about what their life might be like. To think about the fact that Something might be happening in their life right then, right in that moment. They may be rushing off to an emergency, or maybe someone that they love is in some kind of trouble or turmoil, or maybe that person is actively making their transition. We have absolutely no idea, but could stop and take a moment to just take a deep breath and think about the possibility that something might be going on in their lives. The third invitation is to recognize that compassion is a choice. That anger, hatred, prejudice, and cruelty, as well as kindness, forgiveness, compassion, and understanding, are all possibilities within all of our hearts. That all of those things actually live side by side, that our ability to be the cause of suffering and our ability to be someone that alleviates suffering lives side by side within us. We really have to realize and remember that this is where cause and effect comes into play. The only way to really experience love and compassion in our lives is to choose to be the presence of love and compassion. We really live our lives from the inside out. We say this all the time, but it is absolutely true. It's the foundational truth of cause and effect. We can't have anything that we're not willing to be. So I leave you today with a quote by Reverend Ken Gordon, the spiritual director of Centers for Spiritual Living. He says, "We live in a remarkable world at a remarkable time. If there were ever a time for compassion really to come to the front, now is the time to do it. It is time that humanity open its mind to a greater idea and ideal than the one that we have been entertaining for the last several thousand years. And that ideal might be this: humanity, to a large part, is made up of goodness. Most of the people that we know are good people. They have empathy, they have understanding, they have compassion, they have love, and they have light, and they share it on a regular basis. Perhaps what this time is calling for us to do is to really begin looking at what we have in common in the beauty of humanity rather than in the differences. I believe that when we do this, whether we do it as individuals or whether we do it as societies, what happens is that anything unlike what we are seeing will cease to exist, and we will entertain and bring in and invite in a nourishing and nurturing world that will support everyone and help to create a world that works for everyone. So what I hear in this quote is that we have to say yes to the call of this time. That we have to be the cause of that which we wish to see in the world. That we have to choose compassion over being angry, compassion over being righteous, compassion over being prejudiced, compassion over being anything unlike the divinity that we are. Please repeat after me. I am willing to be compassionate. I am willing to be the cause of a world that works for everyone. Of a world that works for everyone. And so it is. Let's please turn within. This morning, as I looked at my minister's listserv, every day they have a prayer, and today, on Mother's Day, the prayer was by Reverend Alice Reed. You may know her as Lani Chavez's sister. And I was really touched by the prayer, and so I share it today. I open myself to the source of all creation. It is both Mother and Father, and all that is seen and unseen. It created me out of its perfection, and it only knows my wholeness. As I open my spiritual eyes, I recall that place within that knows this like I know my own name, and I take refuge. I am safe. I am loved. I am home. As I raise my awareness to this essential reality in my life, my mind and my heart open as my vision clears, and I look upon the world as the mother. I choose to love myself. I choose to love what I label other. Like the proverbial mother, I see all creation as the child. Sometimes it behaves in ways I approve and promote, and sometimes in ways I can't fathom, but it is still the child, the creation of the one, and I choose love, no exceptions. And it is the power of this love that heals and reveals a greater good, a clearer understanding, and a pathway to what is mine to do, to be this powerful love in action. While my thoughts and emotions may wander in the din of a world crying out for love, I come home again and again to this eternal truth that we are one in the heart of the Mother of creation, and that she is calling us home to her love, to remember the power and presence that we are made of. I take refuge in the Mother. I take refuge in prayer. I take refuge in love. I am one with the love of my life. I am blessed beyond measure, and with a grateful heart, I let this be. And so it is. And so it is.